Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here with another Falconry video. Today's video I'm going to be talking about a very unique and highly effective treatment to try to cure a bird that has a disease called Aspergillosis. And before we jump into this subject, if you haven't already, if you can please hit subscribe and like this video, and it really helps me with this channel. But this video in particular, I'm not a veterinarian, and but this is a treatment that has saved lives of my birds, as well as many of my friends as I've shared it. Now, this treatment in particular, before we jump into it, all props go to Steve Layman, a Master Falconer and biologist, who realized what was going on and pioneered this technique, and is still doing experiments and even working with the World Health Organization on applications with how this can affect people. So Aspergillosis in and of itself, we got to talk a little bit about it first. Aspergillosis comes from the Aspergillosis spores. Spores, they're everywhere. They're all over the place. They're in the air. I'm breathing them in right now. In and out, right? Our lungs are always having to deal with particulate matter of all kinds. And with these asperspores, we most often find them as part of the decomposition process. And of course, fungi are the major decomposers of the world, especially with very difficult material like plant matter. So a lot of times when we have, layers of decomposing leaves or wood, some of these asperspores are growing and decomposing that material. And then when you are stirring up that leaf litter, when you are stirring up those, dead trees, bark, those kind of things, then a lot of those spores become airborne and travel. We're breathing them in and out. Normally, for us and for the birds, they're fairly harmless because we're inhaling and exhaling enough that they don't have a chance to take root. But the disease Aspergillosis is when those asperspores somehow get in the respiratory tract and sort of take root and grow. And when that happens, it is a disease that can very quickly, within just a few days to a week, the bird can be dead, which is tragic. And there have been treatments over the years, but none of them have been, in my opinion, all that effective, which is very sad. In particular, any bird could get it. But in particular, it seems a lot of Arctic birds and more northern latitude birds are more susceptible to it, in particularly gyrfalcons and northern goshawks. These are two birds that especially seem to not be able to handle it and have a higher likelihood of contracting this condition. Because of that, you could have an amazing bird that you're flying, you're doing wonderful with, and all of a sudden it contracts it and the bird's dead. And it's just heartbreaking to see it overtake a bird so quickly. So years ago, I was able to attend a lecture, and I've done a couple of more since that Steve Layman put on about his research. And this really is a testament to why we should question things, why we should ask, why does this happen? How does this happen? Or if you read a scientific observation in a book, don't just assume that's what it is. Be open to other possibilities, other interpretations, and always try to learn some of these processes. So here's how it kind of went down, as it was described in the first lecture I got to listen to. Steve explained that we have seen that accipiters, goshawks, Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, they build a stick nest. But typically, within this nest, this whole process, they're going to raise their offspring here. So there's all kinds of things can happen. You're bringing food to the nest. There's going to be, that is going to attract flies. That can be a problem. That, it has to be, the birds are going to go to the bathroom. Well, the babies and the adults know to turn away and go to the bathroom away from the nest, but down below, that is building up over time, a scent that could attract a raccoon or a bobcat that might be like, oh, there's a nest, and might climb up. So as a biologist, as he observed nests and observed behavior, one of the things he noticed that had been documented before was that most accipiters and most goshawks are always seen that they will take sprigs of conifers, evergreens, pulled pieces of fir trees, pine trees, spruce trees, cedar trees. They'll take sprigs of these and put them in their nest. Nobody got too excited. We've always known that. And I remember reading books when I was a kid and seeing that documented. The assumption, the hypothesis put forward was always, well, this is probably to, put something soft in the bottom of the stick nest. It's like, you ever tried to to lay down on pine needles? It's not exactly soft. And it's like, well, maybe it's for camouflage, right? Maybe it is, in all these forests, a big giant nest is very visible. And so putting little sprigs of greenery, maybe that kind of helps break up that image and makes it so that another passing raptor that might want to attack the young is less likely to see it. Okay, that's a reasonable hypothesis. But Steve kept looking at this concept. Why are they doing this? Because one of the things he observed was that the goshawks, they build their nest or add to their nest. They're hanging out together. The male's bringing the female food. They're doing stuff. But it's not until she begins sitting on the nest that he observed those sprigs of greenery to be introduced. You see what I'm saying? So even before she had laid eggs, if she's at the nest, there's no greenery. But as soon as she is hunkered down in the nest, getting ready, brooding, getting ready to lay eggs, suddenly greenery was put there. He also observed the fact that these goshawks would rotate, and once the greenery was starting to get a little dry, they'd take it out and bring in new greenery. This is interesting because the greenery was still green. If you ever had a live Christmas tree, you can probably relate that you can cut down a Christmas tree and have it stay green colored for endless amounts of time. For a month and a half, it can stay green. So why are they taking it out if it's not fresh? It was the fact that it was no longer fresh. So he was taking these observations and really kind of taking a look at things. And to kind of cut to the chase, instead of going into all the research, basically the conclusion was amazing. It turns out that inside of the needles, there are these resin canals filled with terpenes. Terpenes are a hydrocarbon that is antifungal. It kills fungi of all kinds. The off-gassing of these terpenes kills fungi. Now, these are volatile, which means they break down quickly, which means if you have off-gassing coming from a plucked needle, then fairly quickly those terpenes are going to break down and no longer be having that antifungal effect. And so I'll get to that in just a second. It's kind of an interesting thing. Why do they have these? Well, this seems to be remember, a lot of fungi are looking to attack roots of trees, and so when you have these forests of conifers, the needles themselves are off-gassing these terpenes. It's flowing through the air in and around. That's why you walk into these beautiful forests and you smell. It's like, oh, smells like a Christmas tree forest. We're like, oh, it's really nice. You're inhaling those terpenes, okay? And also the needles fall on the ground. And when they do, they give off some of that. Now, think about what a great survival strategy this is. There are mycelial mats growing underneath the bed of pine needles. And if the fruiting body of a mushroom comes up and is like, okay, now I'm going to disperse spores in this forest. Well, they are being dispersed on a bed of terpene-producing needles and being dispersed where the air itself is circulating fungal-killing air, off-gassing. And so it is a way that all these trees together are making a community that prevents the proliferation of any sort of spore that might potentially attack these trees. So for whatever reason, these goshawks understand this. They have evolved to be able to utilize this benefit. So they pick these sprigs up, and think about it, goshawks are highly athletic. When they fly, they are flapping so fast. Their hearts are pumping, their lungs are breathing in and out like an Olympic athlete. Breathing in and out, any spores that are trying to take hold are being expelled, right? But as soon as Mama Goshawk is like, okay, well, I'm going to hunker down, and I'm going to just get ready. In the next few days, I'm going to start laying eggs. So you just bring me food, but otherwise I'm going to just sit all day. That female is not being active. She's not exhaling. She's not dispersing out any asperspores that might be inside of her. So she is now at risk. Sedentary living for birds, but especially for accipiters, that is dangerous. And so putting those bits of sprigs of freshly broken off-gassing needles, when they inhale that, it prevents an antifungal measure to help prevent those take root within her lungs. And of course, then therefore that needs to be replaced. Take those sprigs out, get new ones regularly, which is what they do. Steve did vast experimentation on this and saw that, yes, birds confirmed with Aspergillosis, that he would put needles in with them, put them like maybe in a travel box, our transport boxes that are quite small, and he would put needles in there, and then the off-gassing of those needles definitely did knock down that fungal attack happening in the respiratory system of the bird. And through the experimentation, he found that it is much better because of the off-gassing nature. You have more off-gassing and release of the terpenes if you cut up the needles or if you grind them up. And again, remember, it's a volatile hydrocarbon compound that breaks down quickly. Therefore, you have to replace it often. So what I have done when I have done this procedure, because I heard his first lecture that I heard on it and had used it when I came up in the falconry community, and then later on was told, yeah, I cut them up. So usually in the beginning, when your bird, if you have a bird that is having this respiratory problem, if you have them in that enclosure, cut up the needles, maybe a cup of needles, put them in there, and they'll do that maybe several times a day for the first day. Is what I typically do. Now, part of this process too, remember, sedentary is not good. Even if your bird already has contracted aspergillosis, one of the keys that Steve has explained is that, hey, when you have them out, maybe go ahead and put that cup of needles in the box and maybe let the bird bait and flap, and they're going to be, but then when you put them back in, so they're doing two things. Hopefully, they are expressing out asperspores, but aspergillosis spores, but hopefully that is helping them inhale much more athletically the terpenes that have just freshly been released in that travel box, and it works very well. This has been a lifesaver. I've used it a number of times myself, and I've had my friends do it as well. Here's a follow-up with that, though, that Steve also discovered, and that is that when a bird contracts aspergillosis, then their whole immune system starts to tank. And when any vertebrate life form, when an immune system begins to collapse, any other disease that's been kept at bay comes in. And so a lot of these birds, you'll knock back and kill off the aspergillosis growth itself, but then there will be a secondary bacterial infection that will try to take over. So he had recommended at the most recent lecture I had seen, the addition of antibiotics, that as part of the treatment, that cutting up needles, putting them in, and knocking back the aspergillosis, but then also treating with antibiotics so no bacterial infection can take advantage of that weakened immune system. Now, I've only used this a few times on my own birds, had great success with it, enough that I've shared it, and it's nearly miraculous. It's nature doing what it should. It is those hydrocarbon terpenes destroying the fungus growth in the respiratory tract. So I don't personally have any, other than my own notes from these lectures, I don't have, nor have I seen online, a write-up of the current literature that of his studies and what he's done. If you are aware of that, will you please put that down in the comments so that people can see all the great depth of the study that has been done on this, the effectiveness, and the current ideas of the procedures. But regardless, if you have this opportunity, it's good to the point that a lot of falconers now, just as a way to keep any spores down, even in mews, travel boxes, anywhere, a lot of people will just, hey, I'm just going to cut down some pine boughs and chop them up and just have them in there just to try to cut back on any potential fungal growth that could happen just in the air, any spores. Now, if you're a falconer and you've done your reading and your research, you probably already know this is why it is so important to keep our mews clean, where we house the birds, and it's so important to have any sort of ground cover you have. You want to have something that will not promote the growth of spores. Okay, so you don't want like bark or those kind of things, or wood shavings. This is why a lot of times we'll do pea gravel. It's stone. You can just wash it off, spray it down with a hose. But just remember, you got to keep things clean. You got to keep things so they're not moist and promoting any sort of fungal growth. And that is important just for general day-to-day of keeping your bird. But most especially, remember that in terms with aspergillosis, that adding some pine boughs just to your mew certainly wouldn't hurt. And I hope that some of these procedures I've shared, even though this is not a veterinarian video saying, here is exactly what you do and how much, I'm sharing the principle of what Steve developed, and I hope that it can be of use to you if you ever have the unfortunate predicament of a bird in this situation. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And again, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe. And as always, happy hawking.